So today our point is common language runtime. We always say that CLR is nothing but common language runtime. It is the core component under the .NET framework which is responsible for converting the MSIL code to native code. What is MSIL code? So it is Microsoft Intermediate Language Code. So main aim of CLR is a conversion of MSIL code into the native code. So here you can see the code compilation in .NET framework. In the .NET framework, the code is compiled twice. So what happens in first step? In the first compilation, the source code is compiled by the respective language. Okay, respective language compiler. Okay, and it generates the intermediate code. See here, this is the compiler, language compiler, respective language compiler. When what happens, it generates the intermediate code, or we can say that MSIL code, IL code, or managed code. Okay, this is the first step. Okay, first step of compilation. Then in second step of compilation, what happens? MSIL code is converted into native code. So MSIL code is converted into native code with the help of JIT. Okay. So what is native code? Native code is nothing but the code specific to the operating system, so that the code is executed by the operating system, and which is done by CLR with the help of JIT. Okay, so this is the second step of compilation. Okay, in first step, source code is compiled with language compiler, with appropriate language compiler, and it convert into the MSIL code. So and that code is also called as IL code, intermediate language code, or managed code. After that, this managed code takes CLR or for the another compilation step, and it converted into the native code. Okay, so for that purpose, CLR uses the JIT, and this native code is understandable to the operating system, and then last step is that this code is executed. So we can say that in first step of compilation, the compilation is slow. Okay, so compiler is converted, language compiler is converted into managed code. It is a little bit slow, and compared to that, the compilation of JIT to native code is the fast one. Got it? This is the code compilation in .NET framework. So it always compiles or it always follows the twice compilation at twice. Okay, so see, what is JIT? JIT is just in time compiler. It is the component of CLR that is responsible for converting MSIL code into native code. Okay, MSIL code into the native code. And what is native code? It is native code is the code which is directly understandable by the operating system. Okay, so this is the code compilation in compiler in .NET framework. Our next point is .NET application compilation and running. See, in this figure, how .NET application is compiled and run. We can see here the step by step how it takes place. Okay, first of all, the developer has to write the code. See here, there are many languages. There are many languages, that is C#.NET, then VB.NET, VC++.NET, and other languages. So first, the developer has to write the code using any .NET supported programming language such as C#, VB, J#, VC++, etc. Okay, then the respective language compiler will compile the program. Then respective language compiler will run the or compile the program into something called, that is MSIL code or IL code. Okay, so there are different compilers. So for C#.NET there is a C# compiler. Okay, for VB.NET there is VB compiler. So what happens is this compiler converts the code into the MSIL code. Okay, or we also say that the IL code. Okay, so for the example, if programming language is C#, then compiler is CSC or C# compiler or CSC compiler, and if the programming language is VB, then compiler will be VBC. Okay, VBC compiler is there, that is VB compiler. This intermediate code is half compiled code, that is partially compiled code, and cannot be executed directly by the operating system, right? So this is the MSIL code, that is partially compiled code. Okay, so IL code, that is intermediate code, or MSIL code is the half compiled code, that is partially compiled code, and which cannot be executed directly by the operating system. So to execute this Microsoft Intermediate Language or IL code on your machine, the .NET framework provides common language runtime, right? So here is the work of common language program. Okay, common language runtime. That is, this code cannot be, this code is, MSIL code is a partially compiled code, which is not understandable to your operating system. For that purpose, CLR takes that IL code or MSIL code and it gives to JIT. Okay, here see, here is the IL code. This IL code pass on to the JIT. See here, JIT. And what happens in JIT? What JIT's work? So JIT compiler takes the IL code and reads each and every line of the IL code, and it converts into the machine specific instructions, that is in binary format, and which is executed or understandable to the operating system, which is called as a native code. See here, which is called as a native code. Got it? So, and then our program has been executed. So see, IL code, what is IL code? Is the half compiled or partially compiled or CPU independent partially compiled code. Okay, see, you can think that why partially compiled code or why not fully compiled code is there. So as a developer, you may thinking about why the respective language compiler generates the partially compiled code and why not fully compiled code. Okay, the reason is very simple. Okay, we don't know in what kind of environment .NET code is going on. Okay, in what environment .NET code is going to be run. Okay, if for example it is on Windows XP, or it is on Windows 7, or it is on Windows 10 or Windows Server. Okay, we don't know what operating system is going to run our application. Okay, so we also don't know CPU configuration or machine configuration or security configuration of our system. Okay, in where we are going to run our application. Okay, so MSIL or intermediate code is partially compiled. Okay, and at runtime, MSIL code or IL code is compiled to machine specific instruction. Okay, from here, so this code is converted into machine specific instruction using environmental properties, like what is the operating system, okay, then what is the machine configuration, okay, then CPU, by taking all these specific criteria, the code has been compiled in second step, and it pass on to the execution. Okay, so this is the whole procedure happens in .NET framework for the compilation and running of any application. Okay. So we can say shortly, we have to write the program. Just a minute, I will. Okay, so shortly we can say that we have to write our program by using any programming language. This is first step. Okay, then appropriate compiler of that language will compile the code into the MSIL code. Okay, then MSIL code is uh, um, take as an input and pass on to the JIT. Okay, so JIT convert this IL code or MSIL code into the native code or machine code with the as taking all the issues like operating system, what is the operating system, what is the CPU or machine configuration of your machine, and regarding to that machine code has been produces. Okay, then the code has been executed and we get our output. This is the .NET application compilation and running procedure. So again, what is CLR? So CLR is the heart of .NET framework and it contains the following components. Okay, we see our earlier slide. So CLR is executed our compile code into MSIL code into the native code, right? So as long as conversion, it also provides some advantages or some points to for our applications, like security manager, JIT is compiler is there, memory manager is there, okay, garbage collector is there. So it also provides exception manager, then common language specification and common type system. So we will see step by step, that is what is a security manager. So there is a basically two type components of manager security or managed security. We say that common access security or code verification, that is CV. These two components are basically used to check the privileges of the current user, that is the user is allowed to access the assembly or not. Okay, so this is also provided by CLR. The CLR also sees what kinds of rights or what kinds of authorities this code has, and whether it is safe to be executed by the operating system or not. Okay, so basically these type of checks are maintained by the security manager under uh, the CLR. Okay, this is the security manager. Then next is the JIT compiler. So we have discussed many times earlier, that is JIT, which is responsible for conversion of MSIL code into the native code that is executed by the machine. Okay, so native code is directly understandable by the system hardware, your machine. So JIT compiles the code just before the execution and then saves this translation into the memory. Okay, so this is the JIT compiler. Next is the memory manager. So memory manager allocates the necessary memory for the variables and objects that are to be used by the application. Got it? So it manages the memory for variables, objects, etc. Next is the garbage collector. Here is the garbage collector. What is garbage collection? So when we run our .NET application, at that time lots of objects are created. At given time, it is possible that we don't need to those objects, right? So garbage collector is nothing but is the small routine, or it is repeatedly executed, and its background process thread that runs and try to identify the objects which are not currently used, and for memory of that objects has been deallocates them. Okay, so memory will be free. Okay, so here garbage collector provides the unnecessary memory, or it frees the unnecessary memory. Okay, next point is the exception manager. So exception manager is nothing but the it got the different exception, means it is the component of CLR which redirects the processor to execute catch or finally blocks whenever the exception has occurred at the runtime. When we our application has different exception, so it is responsible, or it directly redirects the processor to execute the catch and finally block. Okay, this is the exception manager. Next is the CLS. CLS is nothing but common types system. Okay, the .NET framework supports many programming languages. We have seen that is C#, .NET, VB, .NET, J#, .NET, like so. Each programming language has its own data type, right? So one programming language cannot understand other programming language data type. Okay, so but there can be situations when you want to code in one language to be called in other language, right? So in order to ensure smooth communication between these languages, okay, the most important thing is that we should have common type system, right? Common type system which ensures that the type defined in two different languages gets compiled to the common data type. Okay, so CLR executes the common type systems. Okay, which is nothing but the okay, next point is the common language specification. So CLS is another part of CLR. So .NET supports many programming language, and every programming language has its own syntactical rules for writing the code, which is known as language specification, right? So every programming language has its own language specification. Okay, so next point is the common type specification. Common type specification is the we seen that .NET framework has, or it supports many programming languages like C#, VB.NET, J#, etc. So every programming language has its own data type. Okay, so one programming language cannot understand and other programming language data type. Okay, so but there can be a situation when you want to code into one language to be called in another language. Okay, so for that purpose, to ensure smooth communication between these languages, the most important thing is that they should have a common type system. okay, which ensures the type defined in two different languages, okay, which gets compiled to the common data type. So CLR will execute all programming languages data type, and it contains its own data type which is common to all programming languages. Um, you can view or learn it in detail in our previous lecture, okay, in .NET framework. With the help of diagram and example, I have explained it, okay. So this is the common language specification. The data type of all languages are commonly defined into the CLR. Okay, so common language runtime, which plays the vital role into the .NET framework, and it provides all these services to our application. So